I still don't know why I walked into that room. I was invited to Jay-Z's Rock Nation meeting, and I swear, what I saw there was so wrong, so terrifying that I had to make a vow of silence. What I witnessed wasn't just a business meeting. It was something darker, something that still haunts me. I was just a nobody, a small-time player in a city filled with people trying to get their big break. I'd been grinding away for years, making connections, taking meetings, doing the work. Every day was a hustle, but I had no idea that when I got that call, when I was invited to a Rock Nation meeting, I'd be stepping into something far darker than I could ever have imagined. I didn't know who would be there. I didn't know much of anything. All I knew was that this was my chance, my big shot to make a name for myself, to finally be seen. So when the email came in with the invitation, I thought, this is it. Jay-Z's team, Rock Nation. People dream of this. They spend their entire careers hoping for an opportunity like this. I don't know how they found me, but the invite came. It said everything I needed to know: location, time, what to bring. But there was one thing that nagged at me. It was the way it was worded. It wasn't personal. There were no pleasantries, no hope to see you there. It felt sterile, cold, almost rehearsed. But I shoved that feeling aside. I told myself I was being paranoid. It was just nerves, right? So I showed up. And from the moment I stepped into that building, something was off. I remember the doorman. I remember him because even though I'd only seen him for a second, I couldn't forget his eyes. Or rather, the lack of them. I don't know if I'm making this up in my mind now, but when he looked at me, it was like he didn't even have eyes. Like his sockets were empty, but he was still staring right through me. I felt nothing. No recognition, no warmth. Just a cold, unwavering presence that made me shiver. He said nothing when I entered. No greeting, no welcome to Rock Nation. He just nodded. A small movement, and I stepped past him, not daring to say a word. Inside, the atmosphere didn't feel anything like you'd expect from a place of power. No bustling energy, no excitement. It was so quiet, so controlled. Every step I took felt like it echoed, even though the floors were carpeted. I was ushered into a large meeting room, and I was told to sit at the back of a long, sleek conference table. The walls were glass, and the view was breathtaking, the city stretching out below us. It was beautiful, but it was too perfect. The lighting was harsh, too bright for the setting. No warmth, just sterile, almost clinical. And the people sitting at the table, they didn't make eye contact. They didn't acknowledge me as I walked in. Not a single smile or casual greeting. I was introduced to the room, but something was already off. The way they all looked at me, it wasn't welcoming. It wasn't even the kind of look you'd expect when someone's curious about you. No, this was different. They looked at me like I was being assessed. Like I was already being weighed, measured, and found wanting. The tension in the room wasn't subtle. It was palpable. It was like you could feel the weight of the silence. They weren't here for small talk. This wasn't a casual conversation. This was something else. Then the door opened. I didn't expect anyone else. It felt like everyone was already there, but when the door swung open, the man who walked in changed everything. He didn't have to say a word. But as soon as he entered, the atmosphere shifted. The air tightened. It was like we all collectively held our breath. Jay-Z. But it wasn't just the fact that he was there. It was the way he walked in, slowly, deliberately. He didn't need to announce himself. He didn't need to make grand gestures. He just was. And somehow it felt like that was all that mattered. I expected a few nods, maybe a handshake. Something normal. But he didn't even acknowledge the people at the table. No pleasantries, just a cold, measured look that made everyone else fall silent. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in around me. He sat down, and without a word, the meeting began. The silence deepened, and I couldn't help but notice how everyone seemed so still. It wasn't natural. These were powerful people who ran empires, made decisions that changed the course of the industry. And yet, they were as still as statues. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke unless spoken to. And when did they speak? It was so precise, so calculated, like they had all been trained to follow a script. I wanted to ask questions, but something inside me told me that wasn't the point of being there. I wasn't supposed to be asking questions. I was supposed to be listening. And when I looked around the room, I realized that everyone else was listening too. But they weren't just listening to Jay-Z. They were listening to something else, something deeper, something dangerous. I don't know how long we sat there, but it felt like hours. The tension grew with every passing minute. I tried to focus on the conversation, but my mind kept drifting. Every few seconds, I'd glance around, catch someone's eye, and feel the weight of their gaze. They were watching me, all of them. And it wasn't just curiosity. It was something else, something colder. And then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a figure standing in the corner of the room, partially hidden in the shadows. A person I hadn't seen walk in. No one seemed to acknowledge them. It was like they were invisible to everyone else, but not to me. I saw them. And when our eyes met, when I saw their face, my blood turned to ice. There was nothing there. It wasn't just that their face was blank. It was the absence of something. It was the way their expression seemed hollow. And then I heard Jay-Z's voice cutting through the room. We're not here to talk business. We're here for something else. His words were sharp, like a knife, cutting through the air. And in that moment, I knew something had changed. I wasn't supposed to be there. None of us were. But what happened next took things to a whole new level. Something I couldn't possibly have prepared for. I should have felt elated. I should have felt like this was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment where everything I'd worked for finally paid off. The invitation alone had been a dream come true. And I walked into that building with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. I'd heard so many stories, so many rumors about Rock Nation, how it was a place of power, a place where dreams came true. I expected something grand, something flashy, the kind of atmosphere that would make you feel like you were about to be part of history. And yet, when I walked in, all I felt was this creeping unease, this strange tension that wrapped itself around my chest like a vice. I was led into a modern high-rise building with clean, minimalist design. It looked like the kind of place you'd see in magazines, polished marble floors, glass walls, shiny chrome details. The whole space felt pristine, almost too pristine. It was like a showroom of success, an aesthetic so perfect it didn't feel real. It felt like a set, like everything was designed to look impressive, but didn't have the warmth of a real space where people lived or worked. As I moved through the lobby, the silence was the first thing that caught my attention. It was too quiet. I expected a hum, a low buzz of people talking, moving, making deals, or at least laughing and chatting. But no, there was nothing. The employees behind the reception desk didn't even glance up at me as I walked past. Everyone moved with purpose, but there was no social energy to be felt, no camaraderie, no sense of connection between them. They were all just going through the motions, feeling like robots. When I was led to the meeting room, I almost didn't notice the eyes that followed me. People in the hall, people sitting at desks. Everyone turned to look, but only for a second, like they were all waiting for something to happen. Their gazes weren't warm. There was no curiosity, no welcome to the team kind of energy. Just cold, calculating eyes, watching from behind glass walls, watching from behind sleek metal doors. I kept my head down, trying to ignore the feeling that I was being observed too closely. The whole atmosphere was unnerving. It didn't help that the person guiding me to the room didn't say a word. She led me with quick, almost mechanical movements, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. She never turned to look at me, never broke stride. It was like I wasn't really there, like I was invisible, a part of the background. And then, as I stepped into the meeting room, the tension was almost unbearable. It wasn't what I expected at all. The room was sterile. No personal touches, no plants, no personal items on the desk. It looked like it could be the boardroom of any high-end corporate company. Sleek, metallic chairs around a long, glossy table. The lighting was cold, almost too bright, making the space feel unnatural. The city skyline outside the glass windows was a sharp contrast to the calm, muted feeling inside the room. I could see people walking below, completely unaware of what was going on inside. There was no warmth here, no welcome. Only people sitting at the table, focused, poised, and silent. I couldn't help but notice how each person was perfectly still, like they were in the middle of some kind of ritual. It felt as though the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to begin. I looked around, taking in the faces of the people seated at the table. I didn't recognize most of them, but I could feel their eyes on me as I walked in. No one stood to greet me. No one made any move to acknowledge my presence. It was like I wasn't supposed to be there, like I didn't belong. But what bothered me the most was how they all sat perfectly still, their bodies rigid, their faces calm and unreadable. There was no casual conversation, no small talk. I sat down at the far end of the table, trying to shake the unease creeping up my spine. I tried to adjust, to tell myself this was just a normal meeting, that it was all part of the process. But it didn't feel normal. It felt off. I looked up to try to see who else was there, but as my eyes scanned the room, I realized that there were a lot of empty seats, a lot of spaces waiting to be filled. It didn't make sense. Wasn't this supposed to be a big deal? Shouldn't there have been more people, more excitement? I shifted in my seat, the chair cold beneath me. My hands were clammy, but I kept my composure. I had to. This was it. The chance I'd been waiting for. I wasn't going to let it slip away because of a few nerves. Then the door opened. I didn't know who was coming in, but when I turned my head, I I saw someone step into the room. He was tall, dressed in black, moving like he didn't care if anyone noticed. But his presence was immediate. He wasn't there to make an entrance. He wasn't there to talk. He just was. It was the kind of energy you couldn't ignore. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could feel his eyes on me, even though he didn't look my way. He looked at the others, at the people seated at the table, as if he was assessing them, making sure everything was in order. No words were exchanged. He didn't sit down immediately. He just waited. I tried to brush it off, tried to tell myself it was just another person walking in. But something about him felt wrong. There was an unease, a presence that I couldn't shake. It was like he didn't belong in this room, like he was here for a purpose no one else understood. It wasn't until he sat down that I realized no one else reacted. No one said anything. No one made any move to acknowledge him. It was like they had all been expecting him. The room shifted and the air became thicker. I could almost taste the tension in the room. But that was just the beginning. What happened next? What I heard in that room took everything I thought I knew and turned it upside down. I knew something was wrong the second I sat down. At first, I tried to convince myself that I was just nervous, that I was imagining things. I mean, I was at Rock Nation. This was a dream come true, right? This was supposed to be the beginning of something big. I was supposed to be excited. Instead, all I could feel was this deep, gnawing unease that I couldn't shake. I looked around the room, trying to get a feel for the other people there. They were all professionals, high-powered individuals with connections to the biggest names in the industry. But what struck me the most wasn't the caliber of the people around me. It was how empty they all seemed. It wasn't just the silence. It was the way they sat there, motionless, as if they were waiting for something. Watching, yes, but not participating. It felt like a performance, one I wasn't meant to understand. I turned my attention to the man who'd walked in earlier, the one who hadn't made any effort to introduce himself. He was sitting at the far end of the table now, staring straight ahead, his back perfectly straight. I couldn't tell if he was even breathing. It wasn't natural. His entire presence felt too still, too controlled. And every now and then, I would catch him glancing at me, just a quick flicker of his eyes in my direction, and then nothing. It was like he knew something I didn't. Like he was waiting for me to do something. But what? And I had no idea. The meeting began, or rather, it appeared to. Jay-Z didn't speak at first. He just watched everyone in the room, his eyes cold and calculating. The others seemed perfectly at ease. Everyone around the table was nodding, making notes, looking down at their phones or laptops. It wasn't anything that unusual until I caught a glimpse of something in the corner of the room. Something that didn't belong. The room was large, but not enormous. The walls were made of glass, and you could see the city stretching out beyond the windows. But behind those windows, there was something strange. A door. A door that hadn't been there when I first walked in. It was almost hidden in the corner, tucked away behind a large piece of artwork. The thing was, no one had entered or exited through that door, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't supposed to be there. It wasn't part of the original layout. It was a door that didn't belong. I couldn't stop staring at it. There was something off about it. The edges were too clean, too neat, like it had been added as an afterthought. I tried to look away, but my eyes kept being drawn back to it. The longer I stared at it, the more uncomfortable I felt. It felt like the room had a secret, a hidden room, a place I wasn't supposed to know about. Then, something happened. One of the people at the table, a woman who had been silently tapping away on her phone, glanced up. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I felt a jolt of electricity shoot through me. I couldn't explain it, but her look felt like a warning. It was brief, but it was enough. There was nothing friendly in her gaze, nothing welcoming, just cold, hard calculation. She looked at me like I wasn't supposed to be there, like I was an intruder, someone who wasn't meant to witness whatever was going on in this room. I looked away quickly, feeling my heart race, but when I glanced back at her, she had already returned to whatever was on her phone. The whole exchange lasted less than a second, but it was enough to send a chill through my spine. The silence in the room was growing heavier, more suffocating. It was as if every word, every gesture was weighed down by a pressure I couldn't understand. I tried to pay attention to the meeting. I tried to focus on what was being discussed, but it felt like the words were slipping right through me, like they didn't matter. Jay-Z finally spoke, breaking the silence with his smooth, controlled voice. But even then, there was something off. His words were clipped, too precise. It felt less like a meeting and more like some kind of ritual. He didn't look at anyone directly as he spoke. His eyes scanned the room, but it was as though he was speaking past everyone, not to them. It was the way he delivered his sentences. Like he wasn't just talking about business, but about something bigger, something more dangerous. "Things are changing," he said, his voice low. "What we do here, it's bigger than anything you've seen. Bigger than what you can understand." The room was still. Nobody reacted. Nobody said a word, but I could feel it. A shift. It was like something had just been laid out on the table, and now everyone had to pretend they didn't see it. I looked over at the locked door again, the one that had definitely not been there when I walked in. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was behind it. I had to understand what was going on. As if reading my thoughts, the man who had been staring at me earlier turned his head slightly, just enough for our eyes to meet. It wasn't the brief, dismissive glance I'd seen earlier. This was different. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, it felt like he was speaking to me. Not with words, but with that look. It was a look that said, "Don't ask questions." And I don't know why, but at that moment, I felt paralyzed. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Something about the way he looked at me, the way the others were staring, made me realize I was walking into something much bigger than I had ever anticipated. Something dangerous. I tried to push the feeling away. I tried to tell myself it was just nerves, that I was reading too much into things, but it was getting harder to ignore. There was something off about this whole thing. The way Jay-Z was speaking, the way the room was so still, the way the others acted like they were part of something bigger. They weren't just talking business. No, this was something else, something darker. I shifted in my seat, trying to adjust to the growing tension, but the door in the corner of the room, the locked door, was still calling to me. It was like it had a life of its own. And for some reason, I couldn't stop thinking about it. But that was just the beginning. What I saw next, what I felt, completely changed everything I thought I knew about this place. And it wasn't just business anymore. I don't know what I was expecting when I walked into that room, but it wasn't this. It wasn't the cold, suffocating atmosphere. It wasn't the eerie silence that seemed to hang over every word spoken. I'd convinced myself for a while that I was just overthinking it, that I was just nervous. After all, I was in one of the most powerful rooms in the music industry. It was normal to feel out of place, right? But the moment the door shut behind me, something shifted. And it wasn't just the temperature or the quiet, no. It was something much deeper. Something that crept under my skin and left a cold, crawling feeling that I couldn't shake. The room seemed to get smaller. The air felt denser. I was aware of every breath I took, every movement I made, every shift of my body in the cold chair beneath me. I looked around at the others sitting at the table, still, unmoving. Their faces were as expressionless as they'd been when I walked in, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were all watching me in a way that felt wrong. I had this deep, unsettling sense that they weren't really seeing me at all, but rather they were seeing something I hadn't even realized yet. I tried to shake it off, but the weight of their gazes pressed in on me. It was like I was being judged, but for something I wasn't even aware of. It was suffocating. And then came the moment that snapped the illusion of normalcy. The man in black, the one who'd stepped in without a word earlier, finally moved. Up until now, he'd been perfectly still, but now, he rose from his chair with such a fluid, eerie motion that it sent a shiver down my spine. His gaze never left the table. He didn't acknowledge anyone, didn't even look at Jay-Z. He just moved. He walked to the corner of the room, to the locked door, the one that had been bothering me from the moment I entered. He didn't hesitate, didn't flinch. He reached for the handle, and the room held its collective breath. That was when I realized something was very, very wrong. I couldn't tear my eyes away from him as he placed his hand on the door. He didn't fumble with the handle. It wasn't like a normal door. It opened smoothly, almost too smoothly, as if it had never been locked in the first place. The soft click of the lock disengaging sent a jolt of panic through me. The door swung open slowly, and for a moment, I could only see a sliver of what was inside, a dimly lit dark space that seemed to pull the light from the room itself. But what struck me wasn't the darkness. No, it was the sound. At first, I thought I was imagining it. A low hum, almost imperceptible. But then it grew louder. And that's when the panic truly set in. It wasn't music. It wasn't anything I recognized. It was something deep, almost mechanical, a low-frequency sound that rattled my bones. It was coming from that room, the one that wasn't supposed to be there. I looked at Jay-Z, but his face didn't change. He didn't seem to acknowledge what was happening. He didn't even blink. He was as still as the others, cold, emotionless, like he was waiting for something to happen. It was as if whatever was going on behind that door was normal. The man in black stepped inside the room, disappearing into the darkness, and the others. They didn't move a muscle. They didn't even glance in his direction. It was like they were all in on something that I wasn't supposed to understand. But at that moment, I felt it. I felt the dread. I felt the darkness, whatever it was, closing in on me. I had to get out of there. I had to leave, but I couldn't. My body wouldn't move. It was like my feet were glued to the floor. I tried to breathe, to calm myself, but it didn't work. The air was thick with something I couldn't name. Something is wrong. I glanced around at the people sitting at the table. They were all focused, eyes locked on the space where the man in black had disappeared. Their expressions hadn't shifted. They didn't look worried. They didn't look curious. They looked focused. And that's when I realized something worse. They were all waiting for something that was supposed to happen, waiting for the door to open again, waiting for whatever was in that room to come out. I glanced at the door again. It was still open. The darkness inside was all-consuming, but it wasn't empty. I saw something flicker, something move in the shadows, something that didn't belong. Something that wasn't human. A figure, tall, thin, elongated, stepped out from the shadows. The figure was dressed in black, just like the man, but this one was different. The way it moved was unnatural, jerky, like it wasn't quite attached to the world around it. It was like it was too still, too perfect. And yet, it was completely out of place. My breath caught in my throat. The figure stood there for a moment in the doorway, and I swear to God, it looked at me. There was something in its eyes, something that sent a chill racing down my spine. It wasn't a human gaze. It was empty, hollow. And in that moment, I realized that this wasn't just a meeting anymore. This wasn't a business discussion. This was something far darker, far more dangerous than I could have ever prepared myself for. But I couldn't look away. I couldn't move. My eyes were glued to that thing, whatever it was standing in the doorway. And then it smiled. Not a smile like you or I would give, but a twisted, grotesque curl of its lips that sent a surge of terror straight into my chest. That's when I felt it. The dread. The weight of something terrible pressing down on me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But I couldn't. I couldn't tear my eyes away. The figure moved forward, and I felt the air grow even colder. It was like the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees in an instant. My teeth were chattering, my hands cold as ice, but I couldn't stop staring at it. I wanted to scream for help, to jump up, to run out the door, to get as far away from this place as possible, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed. Then, the figure stepped back into the darkness behind the door, and the door shut with an audible click. The hum from the room faded, leaving only an eerie silence. Everyone around the table sat still. They hadn't moved, hadn't reacted. They hadn't even blinked. And that's when I knew. I knew something was seriously wrong. Something I didn't understand. Something I wasn't meant to see. Then came the real shock. When Jay-Z finally spoke and the truth of what was happening became crystal clear. But what I heard next completely shattered everything I thought I knew about this place. The room felt suffocating. The air, heavy and thick with something I couldn't explain, pressed down on me. My chest was tight, my breaths shallow. But the worst part was the silence. It was the kind of silence that made your skin crawl, that made every sound feel like an intrusion. It wasn't just quiet, it was unnatural. It was like the room was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I tried to look around, but my eyes kept drifting back to the door that had just opened, the door that had led to something I couldn't explain. The figure in black was gone now, but the fear remained, pulsing in the air, vibrating against my eardrums. Jay-Z hadn't said anything. Neither had anyone else. No one moved. No one breathed. They were all still, frozen in place, their faces unreadable. They had to know something I didn't. They had to understand what was going on here, because I certainly didn't. I was out of my depth, caught in something bigger than I could even imagine. And then Jay-Z spoke. His voice cut through the silence like a blade. It wasn't loud. It wasn't commanding. It was low, controlled, almost too controlled. Like he was speaking to the room, but not really with the room. He wasn't speaking to us. He was speaking through us. "You've seen it now," he said. His eyes were cold, distant, but his voice carried weight. "You've seen what we're capable of." It took me a second to process what he had said. What are we capable of? What was he talking about? My heart raced as the dread inside me began to swell. Whatever I had seen, whatever had happened, it wasn't just some strange meeting. It wasn't some bizarre business deal. It was something far darker than I had ever imagined. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room turning toward me. No, not just turning toward me, but piercing through me. It was like they were looking into me, searching for something I didn't even understand. The figure behind the door, the one who'd stepped into the shadows, it wasn't just part of some twisted ritual. It wasn't some bizarre glitch in reality. No, it was real. I was starting to see the truth. The pieces were falling into place, and it was terrifying. "I didn't think you'd last this long," Jay-Z continued, his tone almost indifferent, like he was talking about a minor inconvenience. "But now that you've seen what's behind the curtain, we can't let you leave." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I froze, my body going cold. I tried to swallow, but my throat had gone dry. What did he mean? I had to leave. I had to get out of there, but I couldn't even move. The weight of his words held me in place. I wanted to scream, to yell, to demand answers, but I couldn't. I couldn't form the words. It was like a sense of powerlessness had settled over me, like I had no control over my own body. The room felt like it was shrinking, pressing in from all sides. The walls, the floor, the ceiling. It all felt like it was closing in. The air was thick, stifling. I could barely breathe. It wasn't just the silence that was suffocating me anymore. It was the anticipation. Something was about to happen, something I didn't understand, something I couldn't escape. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening, trying to find a way out. And that's when I heard it. A soft, low hum started to fill the room, just like before. But this time, it wasn't just the distant sound from the locked room. This time, the sound was closer. It was inside the room, reverberating through the walls, through the floor, through my bones. The hum wasn't mechanical this time. It wasn't like the vibrations of a machine. No, it was deeper. It was alive, the kind of sound you hear in your chest, in your gut, the kind of sound that makes you feel something deep within you. I looked at the others, trying to find a hint of emotion, a flicker of fear, something that could make sense of this nightmare I was trapped in. But no, they were still, cold, unmoving. Their eyes locked on me, and I could see it now, the truth in their faces. They weren't just watching me. They were waiting for something. Something dark. The hum grew louder. I could feel it shaking me from the inside. The floor beneath me seemed to shift, and I grabbed the edge of the table, trying to steady myself. My breath came faster, my hands clammy, my mind racing. But I couldn't stop it. The hum became a pulse, steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to anyone in that room. It was a sound from somewhere else, from something else. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get out. I had to run. But as I moved to stand, I felt something cold, icy, pressed against my chest. It was like a hand, a presence, holding me in place. My body refused to obey me. I couldn't move. I couldn't escape. I looked around the room in desperation, my eyes searching for someone, anyone who could help me. But the others didn't move. They didn't flinch. They didn't react. It was like they were waiting for me to realize something, waiting for me to understand. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. The door. The locked door that had been sitting quietly in the corner that had seemed so out of place from the moment I entered. It opened. But this time, it wasn't just the man in black stepping out. Number. This time, something else emerged from the shadows. A figure. Tall, slender, moving too smoothly. Its eyes were black, completely black, like two empty voids. And as it stepped forward, I could feel the temperature in the room drop even further. It wasn't just cold now, it was freezing. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't think, I couldn't move. The figure's eyes met mine, and in that moment, I knew. I knew everything I had seen, everything I had felt was real. I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't supposed to see this. And that's when everything changed. The room seemed to close in on me, and the figure stepped forward, the air thick with a chilling energy. What happened next was more than I could have ever imagined, more than I was ready to face. I don't know how long I was frozen. A minute? An hour? It felt like time had warped, bending and stretching in ways that didn't make sense anymore. My body refused to move, even though every part of me was screaming to run, to escape, to do anything but stay there in that room. I could feel my heart thudding in my chest, each beat harder than the last, as if it were fighting to break free from my body. I was drowning in fear, unable to breathe, unable to think clearly. The figure, the one with the black eyes, the one that had stepped out of the shadows, was still there, standing perfectly still in the doorway. Its eyes never left mine. It didn't blink. It didn't move. It just stared at me like it knew something I didn't. Something I wasn't meant to know. My legs trembled beneath me, my hands cold and clammy, but I couldn't move. It was as if the very air had thickened, wrapping around me, making it impossible to break free. I wanted to scream, to call out for help, but no sound escaped my throat. My mouth was dry, my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth, and I couldn't find the words. The room seemed to close in on me, suffocating me with its oppressive weight. And then I felt it. A presence behind me, something looming, something that had always been there, watching. I turned my head slowly, unable to tear my eyes away from the figure in the doorway, but something deep inside me told me I had to look. I had to see what was behind me. And there he was, Jay-Z. He had moved silently across the room, but now he was standing just behind me. He wasn't close enough to touch me, but the air around him felt charged, like a storm ready to break. His presence was overpowering, more intense than anything I had felt before. There was no kindness in his gaze, no warmth in his expression, only cold, detached power. For the first time, I saw him clearly. Not just the businessman, not the celebrity. No, this was something else. This was the man behind the curtain, the one pulling the strings, the one who had orchestrated all of this. I didn't know what this was, but I knew it wasn't something good. It wasn't something safe. It wasn't something I was supposed to be a part of. You saw it. Jay-Z's voice cut through the thick silence. His words were soft, almost gentle, but there was a dangerous edge to them, something that made my skin prickle. Now you understand. I wanted to ask what I understood. I wanted to demand an explanation, to make sense of the nightmare unfolding around me, but I couldn't. I couldn't find the words. The fear had lodged itself in my throat, making it impossible to speak. He took a step closer, his eyes locked on mine, his presence suffocating. I could feel the weight of his gaze, like 1,000 eyes pressing down on me. I tried to take a breath, but the air felt thick and heavy, as though the very atmosphere in that room was alive. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he said, his voice almost a whisper now, like a warning. I didn't know what he meant. I didn't know what he expected of me, but the implication was clear. I wasn't going to walk out of here with the truth. I wasn't going to leave with the answers I needed. No. There was something else at play here. Something that I wasn't supposed to witness. I wanted to run. I needed to run. But the fear, the crushing weight of the room held me in place. I couldn't move. I couldn't even speak. It was as though my body had betrayed me, like I was trapped in my own skin, unable to escape. Jay-Z's eyes never left mine. And then, in a voice barely audible, he said, "You're not leaving here? Not without understanding what this is. What does it mean?" That was when I felt it, the change in the room. It wasn't just the figure in the corner or the suffocating presence of Jay-Z standing behind me. No, it was something deeper, something that I couldn't put into words. It was like the room itself had become a cage, the walls pressing in, narrowing, suffocating me, making it clear that I was no longer in control. I didn't know if I was imagining it or if it was real, but the shadows in the room seemed to grow, curling and twisting at the edges of my vision. They stretched out, moving closer, reaching for me, pulling me in. I could feel something pulling at the edges of my mind. Something dark, something ancient. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was terrifying. It was the kind of fear that crawls into your bones and doesn't let go. It was the kind of fear that makes you question whether you've been living in a dream all along, or if you've finally woken up to something far worse. I blinked, and the shadows seemed to shift, moving closer until they were almost tangible. And then, the hum, the one that had filled the room earlier, started again. But this time, it was louder, more urgent. The walls seemed to thrum with it. The sound vibrated deep within me, filling my chest, my skull. Jay-Z's eyes never left mine, his gaze unwavering, as though he was waiting for something, waiting for me to make a decision. And then it hit me. The truth. The realization that had been gnawing at me. The one that I hadn't been able to fully understand. The one that I was too afraid to confront. I was trapped. There was no way out, no way to escape. Whatever was happening here, whatever was going on behind those locked doors, I wasn't going to walk away from it. I wasn't going to survive this. And I had seen too much. I had seen the truth. The realization was like a punch to the gut. My body trembled, my vision blurred, and I thought I might collapse, but I couldn't. I couldn't fall apart. I couldn't give in. I had to stay alert. I had to keep my wits about me. I didn't know what Jay-Z wanted from me, but I was beginning to understand that whatever it was, I wasn't going to leave this place the same. Not if I survived at all. But what happened next took things to a whole new level. And it would change everything I thought I knew about Jay-Z, Rock Nation, and what I had stumbled into. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending I'm safe. Every night, I hear that hum, that pulse, echoing in the back of my mind. It's like it's always there now, lurking just beneath the surface. And every time I close my eyes, I see them, the eyes, the shadows, the door that should have stayed closed. I should have walked away the moment I felt something was wrong, but now I can't undo it. I can't erase what I saw, and whatever is waiting, whatever I was never supposed to see, it's out there, watching, waiting. If I'm gone tomorrow, if no one hears from me again, you'll know why. Just remember, I saw the truth. And the truth, it's worse than you can imagine.